Okay, so today's lesson is going to be on the distributive property, and the learning target is that you will be able to use this distributive property to simplify expressions. Basically, the distributive property is when we will multiply the term on the outside of the parentheses by the terms on the inside of the parentheses. Keep in mind that when using the distributive property that it is extremely helpful and it'll help us stay organized if you draw arrows. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at what you guys already know. We have 4 times 3 plus 2. That's the same thing as saying 4 times 5, which is 20. Then when we take a look at part B, we have 10 times 3 plus 5, which is the same thing as 10 times 3 plus 5 is 8, and 10 times 8 is 80. Now let's take a look at part A, but using the arrows for the distributive property. So when we use arrows, we're going to go from the outside term to both inner terms. That gives us 4 times 3 plus 4 times 2. 4 times 3 is 12 plus 4 times 2 is 8, and that gives us 20. And then looking at part B, we have 10 times 3 plus 5. We're going to distribute that 10 to the 3 and distribute that 10 to the 5, and that gives us 10 times 3 plus 10 times 5. 10 times 3 is 30, plus 10 times 5 is 50, and that gives us 80. Now if you take a look from the previous slide and this slide, we get the same answer. Now let's try using the distributive property with variables. So if you take a look at part A, we have 4 times 3k plus 2. We're going to distribute that 4 to the 3k and the 4 to the 2. So that gives us 4 times 3k plus 4 times 2. 4 times 3k is 12k plus 4 times 2 is 8, and that's our final answer. Then for part B, we do the exact same thing, and we're going to distribute the 8 to the 2 and the 8 to the 9b. So we get 8 times 2 plus 8 times 9b. 8 times 2 is 16 plus 8 times 9b, which is 72b. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to go over the different examples of distributive property. The first one is your basic distributive property, the one that's most common. So what we're going to do is distribute the 3 to the 4x and the 3 to the negative 5. And that gives us 3 times 4x plus 3 times negative 5. 3 times 4x is 12x, and then 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. The next example is when you have to distribute the negative number. So the first step in distributing a negative number is that you want to rewrite that negative symbol out front right here as a negative 1. And when you do that, you get negative 1 times 5x minus 9. Then you distribute that negative 1 to the 5x and the negative 1 to the negative 9. And you get negative 1 times 5x plus negative 1 times negative 9. And you get negative 5x. A negative times a negative is a positive, so positive 9. Okay, so our final example is going to be distribute and simplify. And the simplify is just combining like terms at the end that we learned in the last video. So we're going to first distribute 2 to the 3x squared, and that gives us 6x squared, and then 2 to the 4y which gives us 8y. And finally, 2 to the negative 8, which gives us negative 16. Then we just bring that positive 5 on down. After we combine like terms, we get 6x squared plus 8y, and then the negative 16 and the positive 5 give us negative 11. Okay, and then we have one more example for the distribute and simplify. So we have our negative 4x, and we bring that on down. And then in this case, even though the 5 is behind the parentheses, it's still being multiplied by that quantity inside. So we have to distribute this 5 evenly, and we're going to do 5 to the 2x and 5 to the negative 3. And 5 times 2x gives us 10x, and then 5 times negative 3 gives us negative 15. And then finally our last step is to simplify, and so we're going to simplify the negative 4x and the positive 10x, and that gives us 6x, and then bring the negative 15 down. And there's your final answer.